Good evening, and welcome to the National Humanities Center Humanities in Class webinar series. Tonight's session is titled Emmett Till, Creating Historical Vignettes. We'll be working with Mike Wiley, an actor and a playwright from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and also the founding leader of Mike Wiley Productions. My name is Andy Mink, and I'm the Vice President of Education Programs for the National Humanities Center. I want to welcome all of you back to our fresh winter and spring semester. I know the last time we worked together was just before the holidays. It seems like a long time ago in some ways, but I'm sure most of you would say that that time is pretty fast and furious. It's important to us to acknowledge and to recognize that each one of you have come from classroom likely, you've come from your own teaching day, you've come from, there you go. Thanks, everybody. You come from a classroom environment in which you are literally spending your whole day working with students and taking humanities education to them. And then you're coming and joining us for a couple of hours on a weeknight. And we really do appreciate your engagement and your dedication. Many of the names in the attendees box that's 2 or 3 down on your Go to Training Control panel are folks that have come to many different sessions, and it's always great to see you return. We also welcome new members in this community. We encourage you to share this webinar series registration link and all the work we do at the Humanities Center with your colleagues and your network and your schools and your departments. We're very, very pleased to be able to enter this conversation with you. Mike Wiley is going to actually represent a little bit of an experiment and a departure tonight, and I could not be more pleased to welcome him to the webinar series. Again, as I mentioned, Mike is located and based not too far from me here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And typically, I'd be standing on a stage maybe in front of you and your students or your student school community. And maybe I'm introducing Mike as he's about to engage in a play like he is tonight. We're going to try to do this through a virtual and long distance mechanism. And for that reason, I'm going to encourage each one of you to make sure that your internet Wi-Fi connection is as strong as you can. Maybe that means moving around a little bit or switching the routers that you might be accessing. I'd also encourage you to turn your volume up. We're going to be using a lot of video and media tonight. For the first time, at least, that I've been doing these webinars, we're going to activate the live video feed so you can actually see Mike at different points and you can begin to extrapolate the passion and the preparation that he as an actor and an historian brings to these roles. And then we're going to try to unpeel that and try to give you some really clear examples of both how and why historical vignettes, historical plays, historical imagination are an important tool in the work that you do in all of your humanities classrooms. So if at any point you aren't hearing things clearly, if at any point the video is dragging a little bit, it's going to be tempting to type into the chat box and ask me to fix it for you, and I'll do my best if I can, but it's likely going to be on your end with the bandwidth. And so, again, maybe reposition yourself or close some other windows that you have open in your laptop and try to give this session your undivided memory from the computer that you're using. Having said all that, we do record each of our sessions, and so if, again, for some reason, the media doesn't quite play as seamlessly as you're hoping, you will be able to view the recording. You'll also have access to the PowerPoint and to the other materials that we've made available. So I'm very excited to bring this extra dimension to our webinar, and I'm hoping that each one of you, many of you, will chime in the chat box and let us know how it's going and let us know how you're pulling new meaning out of the work that we're sharing. This webinar is dependent on that participation. You will primarily view the PowerPoint that is associated with this webinar. You hear my voice asking questions and asking for clarifications, pulling questions that you type into the chat box. So thoughts that you have, resources that you have, things that you've done in your classroom, please add those to the chat box. And when you do so, you're not just adding them with your colleagues, you're not just in conversation with each other, but those are things that I can pull out and offer to Mike to respond to or to reflect on. So this webinar is an audio and PowerPoint webinar primarily. Again, tonight we'll have a video component as well, but the chat box is going to be your way to engage in the webinar and in the process. The National Humanities Center has been for 41 years a leader in humanities scholarship and in humanities outreach and education. We're located just outside of Durham, North Carolina, and every single day a cohort of university professors in fellowship come to this building, and they do their work, their research, they write their books, they have conversations, they extend and advance our understanding of the world through the humanities. Our education department then aims to build bridges between that world and the world of the classroom, the K-12 classroom, the post-secondary classroom. We try to offer the content and the scholarship and the support of the academic experts that we work with to creating better and more inquiry-based instructional resources. In many cases, you can go online and find examples of these. Our American class lessons and resources page is full of free and open lessons that have been created at the center and vetted by scholars. These are not just lessons, but they're also primary source collections and kits, as well as teaching resources. And these webinar series have really become a powerful way for us to facilitate conversation between those who work in the scholarly world and those who work in the classroom. I would encourage you to go, if you haven't, and visit our webinar series page. Just recently, we've added 3 new sessions for the spring calendar that you can see the examples on the screen in front of you. Many of these sessions are beginning to reach maximum capacity. We do cap them at 200, and I know a handful have reached 200, and there's another handful that are in the 190s. So I'd encourage you to go in and sign up for them. We'll be stretching into early May. I think we have one of these that's maybe even in late May. And so, going in and checking in every now and again is a good way to stay on touch with what we're offering. We also offer other instructional resources, including a podcast series that offers conversations in audio format between scholars and teachers on the best way to approach humanities education. We also have digital textbooks available on iTunes. And through these textbooks, you can offer both the full compilation, but also individual pieces to your younger students to help them better understand how humanists approach their work, how the humanities in general can affect the way that we live our lives and the roles that we play as citizens in our country. I'm really pleased as well to announce that we have open registration for our spring online course series. We're in development right now of several new titles that will be open later in the spring. By next August 2019, I hope to have at least 8 or 10 different titles in our portfolio. But most importantly, for right now, we've got 2 sessions of digital literacy in the classroom that's open. One of them has already filled at capacity. The second one is accepting participants now. And we've also opened a course titled Suckers and Swindlers, which is a look at the history of schemes and scams and fraudulent behavior from an economic and historical and a cultural lens in America's 20th century. And that's open now as well. So if you go to the link on our webpage, you can sign up and grab one of those slots. We will be offering these courses and others in additional sessions, likely later in the spring, certainly early next fall. So again, keep an eye on that webpage, and you can grab one of those spots. All the work that I'm sharing with you right now is, to a large degree, intended to not be hypothetical, not to be irrelevant to what you do in your daily classroom. And I'm very thankful and grateful to our Teacher Advisor Council for helping to keep us really dialed in and aware of what classrooms across the country are dealing with, what they're struggling with, and what they're successful at. I'm very pleased to welcome the 15 members of our Teachers Advisor Council that you see on the screen in front of you. I know tonight, in fact, Michelle Kane from New Jersey is with us. Judy from Orlando is with us. I think I noticed that Julie Trotter is with us. So anytime that we have activities or developing curriculum and materials, we'd like to go to these folks to ask for their opinions and to really give us some feedback. If you're interested in joining our council for the 2019-20 school year, keep an eye probably around April when we'll begin to accept applications and again aim to build this very diverse, both geographically and in terms of discipline, this diverse group of advisors. Tonight's session will be documented, and when you are finished with the webinar, you'll be receiving a prompt that invites you to fill out a survey, and once that survey is completed, you'll be able to receive and download your certificate. Grab that, print it out, add it to your teaching portfolio, take it and wave it in front of your principal's face. It's a way for you to keep track of all the work that you've done with the National Humanities Center, and again, that will be available at the end. One thing that Libby Taylor, my colleague, and I attempted to do is to make this process a little more streamlined for you. So if you go to our webinar registration page, you may notice that there's a downloadable document, a prior approval form that we've created that has all of this spring's webinars listed and allows you to grab all of them at once and submit those as one sort of bundled cumulative total to your administration. So I'd encourage you to use that. We've tried to make it accessible and applicable for any state and any district. We've also tried to be aware that oftentimes you receive credit for things that aren't immediately known to us. So there's a content piece here, but there may be a technology piece, there may be a interdisciplinary piece. So if there's anything we can do to help you document this for your school district and your state, please let us know. But we're hoping that this prior approval form will do that as well. Finally, before we start tonight's webinar, I want to thank our sponsors. These partners are an important part of us both promoting and disseminating information, but also I think sort of standing as thought leaders in education and in humanities education. One of our sponsors tonight is the National Council for Social Studies. Many of you likely are members of NCSS, which is the largest professional association in the country that's devoted solely to social studies education. I've been privileged and pleased to serve on the board of directors for NCSS for the last 3.5 years, and I believe very strongly in both the vision and the mission of NCSS. It's a wonderful place to both get resources in print and online for your social studies classroom. It has a wonderful conference every fall that typically attracts somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 teachers from across the country. And it's in some ways, it's really the first place to stop as you want to join that network of professional educators in the field. I'll also note that there are state social councils for the social studies in all states, and I would encourage you to also be involved with and be aware of the materials that your state council can offer. And we also have a second sponsor tonight that's a big part of why tonight actually is happening. And Paul Bonici from the Carolina K-12 at UNC Chapel Hill, I think maybe introduced me to Mike Wiley originally. Paul, I think you're with us tonight. Can you hear me?
I am. Hello, everybody.
Fantastic. Tell us a little bit about Carolina K-12.
Okay, before I get started, I'd like to thank Andy and Libby in the National Humanities Center for inviting us and for hosting this webinar. They have a lot of great resources, you heard, so I encourage everybody on here to check those out. But I'm here to talk about Carolina K-12. We're a program based out of UNC Chapel Hill, and our mission is to extend the resources of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to all of the state's K-12 teachers. And we do that in two main ways. One of them is through a number of free institutes, teacher workshops, and fellowships that we hold in Chapel Hill as well as across North Carolina. And another way we extend those resources is by hosting a free online database of K-12 resources. And those are available to any teacher around the world free of charge. All the materials are included in all of the lesson plans. So they're really easy to use, easy to download, and they're very comprehensive. So that's really all I'd like to say. You can find us at carolinak12.org as well as k12database.unc.edu. But before I go, I need to give a big shout out to Mike Wiley. We have worked with Mike for a number of years, and he is by far our most favorite collaborator. Every time we bring him to a teacher workshop or a program, people just get super excited about his performances, and they can't wait to get him back to their school. So everyone here is in for a really big treat tonight, and I've seen Mike a number of times, and I can't wait to see him tonight. So thanks again for having me, and enjoy.
Thanks so much, Paul. Again, I want to be, and sorry, Paul, I just realized that we had several slides here that
that's okay.
Yeah, well, all at once, everybody can see. And Paul, it seems like you've invited the whole world to contact you with your email address there. So hopefully your email address, your email box will be full tomorrow. Again, I want to thank Paul for introducing me to Mike. And I think tonight's session, tonight's webinar is going to be particularly interactive and particularly intriguing to see how some of the ways in which Mike, as a playwright and an historian, gets sort of invest in that imagination around these kinds of historical topics. And I'm imagining right now we've got teachers from all over the country who might typically be in an audience watching Mike come out on the stage. And I think this virtual piece is an important part to try. I think one of the things I'd like to emphasize is that Mike Wiley does offer these services to your schools, to your districts. He does work on a national stage, and so if you're interested in him coming and working with you, you can get in touch with him. But right now, there's likely colleagues of mine like Mike Williams over in Warren County who's got a group of teachers with him all watching this same webinar. Others of you might decide to take this recording or some of the materials from it and share it with your students tomorrow, or invite your students to attend some future webinars. Others of you, like my friend Michelle, might be over in Greensboro with her dog Winter and her son Davidson, and sort of wondering how this is going to translate into the digital stage. And I think, Mike, as I unmute you here, I think, I'm anxious to hear not only how you work as a playwright, but I'm particularly interested to hear how you work as an historian. Mike Wiley, I want to thank you and welcome you to our session. Mike, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I can, very much.
Let me thank you all for being here with me tonight. And again, I want to say I'm going to go through this, and at times I might turn on the video and chat with you out of my own desire to have some interpersonal activity with you, because that's generally how my work is received, and it's received best that way. But this will be a fantastic experiment. So, on May 24th, 1956, Dr. T.R.M. Howard, a black physician and World War II veteran, addressed a crowd at Madison Square Garden in New York City. The historic Madison Square Garden Civil Rights Rally, as A. Philip Randolph, president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, billed it, and later called the Heroes of the South rally, was one of the first and largest of its kind. In addition to drawing a crowd of some 16,000, the evening featured Eleanor Roosevelt, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., Roy Wilkins, authoring Lucy, Rosa Parks. Now, Rosa Parks was there in part because she had heard Dr. T.R.M. Howard speak back in the fall of 1955. Just a little while after the trial of Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam, Rosa Parks heard Dr. Howard speak at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Dr. King had invited him there from Mound Bayou, and Dr. Howard spoke passionately and in detail about the Emmett Till case. It moved Mrs. Parks. It moved her so much so that she sent a letter to a friend regarding the case and how much it was weighing on her. 4 days later, she refused to get up off of that bus in Montgomery. In addition to Mrs. Parks, E.D. Nixon was there, Sammy Davis Jr., and Cab Calloway. T.R.M. Howard opened his address with some Cold War shade, saying, "I come to you tonight from that Iron Curtain county, from that Iron Curtain slew of counties called Mississippi." He stirred the bets in the crowd. "We have grown tired of fighting for something across the sea that we can't vote for in Belzonia. The white people in Mississippi are not afraid of the Supreme Court. They are not afraid of Congress. But every time you mention the NAACP, they tremble in their boots." Dr. Howard knew how to move a crowd. He had been doing so all through the fall of 1955 and the winter of 1956. He had raised thousands of dollars, all in the name of Emmett Till. He had been there in the courtroom trial of the accused murderers with Emmett's mother, Mamie Till Bradley, asking For a show of hands that May evening, he remarked that most of the folks present were blacks born in the South. The reason you are here in New York is because you are running away from conditions described here tonight. Earlier, Dr. Howard had evoked the names of Reverend George Lee and Lamar Smith, friends of his, men who had been murdered for seeking voting rights. And now, Emmett Till had ascended to the pantheon of martyrs and become a rallying point alongside Lee and Smith. Many more donations were collected that evening, and for decades to come. Millions, in fact, building a movement, a civil rights movement that would lead to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and ultimately, as Timothy Tyson, author of The Blood of Emmett Till, writes, a new black sense of self. The tragedy of Emmett Till is an American story that continues to fascinate, infuriate, and even galvanize moments and movements here in the U.S. and around the world. Even now, as the truth is still unfurling in 2019, with the Justice Department reopening the case, with 2 new books in the last 18 months, film being produced by Whoopi Goldberg on the horizon, we are still sifting through the jagged pieces of this tragedy, attempting to make sense of the senseless and find truth in its wake. Chinua Achebe, author of Things Fall Apart, writes, all stories are true. I think the old proverb also has great meaning here. There are 3 truths, my truth and your truth and the truth. Journalist William Bradford Huey convinced Till's murderers to confess to a version of their truth several months after the killing, printing their accounts in Look magazine under the sensationalized headline, The Shocking Story of a Proved Killing in Mississippi. The circumstances of the confessions are cloudy at best, with money changing hands to the tune of $4,000, a boatload of improbabilities, and Huey's own Hollywood ambitions. Regardless, Huey's story became a version of the truth for millions. In addition to copies of their nearly 4 million subscribers, Look printed an extra 2 million for the newsstands. 3 months later, the story would be reprinted for 11 million subscribers to Reader's Digest. Huey's story, and consequently Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam's version of events, would shape America's imagination of the Till case for 50 years. Tonight, I will present a performance lecture for you all that seeks to straddle 2 time periods. Huey's version of those events and what we now know and believe we know about the events that took place that fateful week of August 1955.
In December of 1955, nearly 6 months after the kidnapping, murder, and subsequent trial revolving around the Negro youth, Emmett Till, and his accused killers, J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant Jr., I sat down with the 2 men that had been hoisted on the shoulders of white supremacy and later shunned by those same friends and neighbors. I questioned the men, not as a journalistic source and not as interrogated witness, but as a Southern white man, the Southern white men. I knew they did it. That answer was brutally obvious. What this reporter wanted to understand, what Look magazine paid $4,000 to print, and what several million Americans plunked down 2 bits to read and gossip over is, why?
Boys gonna be boys, Mamie. Y'all want to see a picture of my girl? here or in Mississippi. Mama, we gonna miss the train. Emmett Till. You remember what I told you? They're gonna be big-headed? Yes, Mama. Lazy? Bo Till, you didn't even kiss me goodbye. How I know I'll ever see you again. Aw, Mama. Ornery? If you so cool, why don't you go into the Bryant grocery and take a pass at pretty Miss Bryant? And hot in the pants. May I help you? Open the door, preacher. Looking for the boy that done the talking in money. But they's just being boys. You still have white women? Huh? Answer me. Yeah. This is William Bradford Huey of Look magazine. I'm here with Roy Bryant, age 24, and J.W. Milam, age 36. No fears, gentlemen. I'm only recording this so as to be clear of the facts. It's a tool I've come to find reliable in a pinch. On last September, jury here in Mississippi found you both not guilty of murdering a Negro youth from Chicago named Emmett Till. Now, before the trial, y'all admitted to kidnapping the youth, but held no blame in his disappearance and consequent murder. You've only been indicted for the abduction. Scot-free, clean as a whistle. Not a word has been uttered outside of a courtroom by you or your kin until now. Without your missing piece of this puzzle, hypocrisy and myth have flourished. Now, hypocrisy can be exposed, myth dispelled. J.W.? Mr. Huey, our piece of Delta is a humid, mosquito-infested, dusty old corner of Mississippi. Now, if you leave here with one scrap of knowledge about us and our way of life, you write it down. That Monday, Mississippi, Greenwood, Mississippi, Mound Bayou, Mississippi shit, the whole of the Delta itself is just a loop. A loop strung together by Jesus, kinfolk, and heritage. White heritage and colored heritage. When I was a little girl, there was a story told by my parents and the parents of other colored children. A cautionary tale, you could call it. The short life of a child who was punished for not knowing her place. She was playing with the daughter of the white folk her mama worked for, and they got to fighting over a little old rag doll, like pretty girls do. Just a caterwauling, as they say, over some yarn and stitching, with one eye missing and an arm in need of mending. It didn't matter who the doll belonged to when the master came to intervene. It only mattered that the little white girl run her lip out with a handful of crocodile tears, while the colored gal held her ground like a woman 50 years her elder. That brave little girl was foolish enough to spout all sorts of no ways and no hows and ain'ts and won'ts. That old white fellow grew crab apple red with embarrassment. He took hold of the little girl. No's and nays. Nays and won'ts. Did you forget yourself? I'm gonna shake them knots right out of you. And he did. Shook her till her back snapped and buckled. Worst of all, he didn't tell her mama she'd been punished. Just told her to go about her work. And if she didn't, she'd lose a day's pay. So she finished up her chores while her baby girl sobbed and moaned, gasped and choked, and eventually died, laid out under the hot Savannah sun. No, Bo, that's what we called Emmett, never had to hear me say, "I will shake a knot in you." Well, at least he never had to hear its sickening origin. You see, I was raising Bo in Argo, Illinois, just a hair outside of Chicago. Mama, we won! The White Sox won! We mutilated him! Bo Till steps up to the plate. Till waits. There's the pitch. Socko! It's up! It's over! And it's out of the park. Bo Till's done it. The White Sox win the pennant. The White Sox win the pennant. Bo Till is being hoisted by his teammates. No. Chicago was a place where he didn't need to know Jim Crow. At least, not until. So I'm going to stop there just for a moment and comment on Mamie's statement of Chicago not necessarily being a place where Bo didn't need to know Jim Crow. And part of the narrative over the years, and not just in this story, but I think nationally, part of the narrative over the years is that perhaps in northern areas, African Americans didn't need to know Jim Crow, but we now know that that is not true. We knew back then that that is not true. That in fact there were parts of Chicago, many parts of Chicago that were segregated. There were parts of Chicago that were certainly violent. There were parts of Chicago that Emmett would have been told that he could not go into. So part of that particular narrative of Emmett not being completely aware, as recent historians have told us, Emmett not necessarily being aware of the taboos and things that he might not be able to say or do in Mississippi. I believe he probably knew to some extent, not necessarily at all to the extent that someone living in that area would know, but I believe that historians have now noted that he certainly did know to some extent, but that didn't stop Mamie from telling him as often as she could. I will open it up to anyone that might have some question right now, or I will continue. All right, then I'm going to continue. Chicago was a place where he didn't need to know Jim Crow. At least, not until Roy, Bryant, Carolyn, my wife and me, been married for about 4 years now. She's a good woman, an honest woman. She was living over in Indianola when we met, dropped out of school and married me. Moved here to Munn and started working the front of the grocery. Step up? Maybe. At least we got a filling station and a post office. Now we just simple folk. Too poor for an automobile, no room for a television. Outside of church on Wednesdays and Sundays, the best we can do is a Saturday night drive-in picture show. The best one I've seen. Shane. Papa Mose was up for a visit from Mississippi. He wanted to carry Bo and his cousins back down for a week-long vacation. I know he's big for his age, but let him go back down to Money, Mississippi. He ain't but 14, and as big as he is, he's childish and dawdling when it comes to eating on humble pie. This week, he's Larry Doby. Last week, he was Joe Louis. Oh, Papa Mose, he just gets so dang big for his britches. Too big for Mississippi. That boy survived the polio, and ain't very many doing that, which means he's strong. Lord knows you're a good mama, which means he got the proper home training. Boys gonna be boys, maybe. Here or in Mississippi. They're gonna be big-headed, lazy, ornery, and hot in the pants. But there's just being boys. That's all. He will be all right anywhere, maybe. Even in the Delta. Mama, we gonna miss the train. Emmett Till,
You remember what I told you? Yes, Mama. Don't talk to, don't sass, don't look at, don't smell, don't taste no white folk. Oh, I'm just jostling you, Mama. I know how to act around them country folk. You make it sound all worse than it is. I was making it sound worse. Trying to, at least. Topping his fears every chance I got. This wasn't a dozens game on our back porch. Wheeler, Parker. Bo was a pretty good marble shot, and he could hold his own playing the dozens. Your mama's so old, when she was born, the Dead Sea was just getting sick. Probably why we were so thick. Not to mention we was about the same size, even though I was 2, 3 years older than him. Mama say we might go down to money with you and Uncle Mose. Them country squares ain't gonna know what blew through. Bo could dress to the nines on Saturday and Sunday. I guess he figured if folk kept their eyes on his threads, they'd keep their ears off his stammer. He even started carrying a wallet that year. Mama bought it for my birthday. Gonna be full of loot if I come down to money with y'all. I already got some pictures. See my girls? The wallet came with a photo of the movie actress Hedy Lamarr on one side, and he kept a school photo of a white girl from around the way on the other. He claimed he had rounded a few bases with old girl, but 14-year-old tales can be tall. I believe my cousin could have talked his way out of the devil's clutches. But keeping those girls in his back pocket, man, that was trouble waiting to happen. Please, Bo, just put a handle on all those yeses and nos. Say yes, Mr. So-and-so, and no, Mrs. So-and-so. And what do you do if the words get stuck in your mouth? You whistle if a word won't come. You hear? Go ahead and go, Bo. Emmett Till, you didn't even kiss me goodbye. How I know I'll ever see you again. Oh, Mama, here, take my watch. If folks down south is slow as you say, I won't hardly need it. And your daddy's ring? Do you want me to take that as well? Nah, I'm gonna show it to them country cousins. Bye, Mama. Bye, Bo. Preacher Mose. Get your butt up, Preacher Mose. Who's that there? I'm looking for the boy, Preacher, the one that done the talking and money. What you want with him at this hour? We just want to talk with him. Open the dang door, Preacher. Money, Mississippi, ho! Hey, you boys wake up. This your train stop. Unless you want to be walking back from New Orleans. Money, Mississippi, ho! Our God, Bo Till, you done went and growed up. Woo! Big as a man you is, got to be your mama's cooking. Maybe do know how to stick a toe in it, don't you? How's you doing anyhow? Oh, I got to get on up to that Illinois before I pass. Our God, they say them Chicago streets is paved with gold, which I know is a tale, but the Bible say the root of a tale is the truth. Ain't that right, preacher? Mm-hmm. You boys, come on and get into the Ford. Bo Till, you come on up here and sit next to your Aunt Lizzie so I can hear all about them Chicago coloreds. Our God, preacher say coloreds up there be owning their own land and stores and such. Woo-wee! That would be the day down here in the Delta. Wouldn't it, preacher? Picking our own cotton instead of Mr. Grover's? Of course, we do get our fair share from them. Now we do. Once preacher give 'em a counting lesson. We ain't come up short since. I got preacher got the respect of these white folk round here. The much respect as a colored man can have. Now I'm gonna pause here for a moment again to allow for any comments or any questions. Now in creating this play, I've been performing it around the country for I would say almost 15 years now. I started performing it before the
actual trial transcripts were found. I started performing it before a number of pieces of new evidence were found. And so over the years, as any playwright or even a historian might do, I've started to incorporate those things that I've come to find out as new for me um, in the particular production. I try and use the history of the time period, not just an understanding of who the individuals are, but also reading their biographies or interviewing those individuals that might still be alive, or watching film footage from that time period to find just the ways that they might have spoken, um, uh, the way that Emmett's aunt speaks, even though I was never able to hear her speak. I take a leap of faith knowing a number of people that live in the Mississippi Delta. Also, given my own background as an African American with great grandmothers, and I had a great grandfather who used to exclaim, "I got this and I got that," and I felt, here's a place where I can use those bits and pieces, those personalizations, as it were, from my own life in my writing. Also, I want to add, knowing the fact that there in Mississippi, the Jackson, the newspaper, was just about every week in that summer of 1955 writing articles about the NAACP and how they were encroaching on their ways and their livelihoods, and really it was ginning up the white folks there in the Mississippi Delta, as well as all over Mississippi, and therefore I incorporate that in the piece, in the emotion of it, and in the emotion of Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to keep going.
Eula Lee Bryant. Now, they weren't never into no meanness. I raised them and I'll stand by them. I have 11 children, 8 sons and 3 daughters, 2 marriages. Roy and J.W.'s just half-brothers, but you couldn't tell less than they told you. Roy spent 3 years in the paratroopers, and J.W. was a lieutenant in the Army. He got his Purple Heart fighting. Still has a scar across his chest. They had to cut 27 pieces of shrapnel out of him. And they's both good daddies. 2 boys apiece. Those young'uns worship their fathers, and all the niggers down in Glendora, where our old store was, they caught fire. Thought of J.W. just like a daddy, and they always come to him for help.
Now, we were sitting in Wednesday evening services, sweating out our sins, and I give a nod to the boys to duck out, go get a cold RC and some snuff from over at Bryant's in Money. Colored church services last so long, I knew we'd have time for a round of checkers and a couple of cokes and still be back before benediction. Uncle ain't mind so much now that he was more parishioner than preacher. So we ducked out, loaded up, and I drove us in Uncle's Ford over to Bryant's in Money. It was a normal evening. I mean, normal for Mississippi. It was hot and it was humid. We was all wrestling and fooling around outside old Bryant's when a good old round of dozens kicked up.
Your teeth so bucktooth, you could eat corn on the cob through a fence. Well, your teeth so yellow, they could beat corn on the cob.
Bo was sure good at working a crowd.
Your feet so big, you make grown men jealous.
Most days he was so good, you just couldn't tie him up.
That's why you carry an old white girl's picture in your wallet instead of your greasy grandmammy.
Bo didn't expect that. At least not from a girl. Seemed like you could say anything you wanted about his size, his stammer, even his dead daddy. But do not get on the girls that were special to him.
Bo looked at that country girl for a good hot minute, till he whispered, I'd rather have that picture in my wallet than your old Bama butt. You think you hot snot. Why don't you go into the Bryant grocery and take a pass at pretty Miss Bryant? You like white girls so much. Now, again, I'm going to stop here for a second because I want to talk about the playwriting process coupled with the understanding of history and the historian's job. As a historian and a playwright, I knew that it was through playing around with his cousins, them egging him on, and playing the dozens outside of the Bryant grocery, in part, was the reason that he found himself inside that store. Now, I didn't know the makeup of the cousins outside. I mean, I knew Wheeler Parker was out there, and Simmy and Robert, but I didn't know whom else was out there. And it's not really documented who else was out there. And it's not really documented exactly what they were saying out there. So as a playwright, I need to take a leap of faith. I need to take a leap of faith knowing what life was like in the Mississippi Delta at that time period, what young people at that particular age might say to each other to get under each other's skin, as well as the historical record, and couple all those things together to be able to weave a scene out of something that might not be a scene, or there might not be a scene written, but I needed to be able to make a scene. And so that's how a scene like that takes place or gets written. Now, nobody thought Bo was brave enough to do it. I mean, he hardly backed down from a challenge, but this right here was suicide. But by now, we were all pushing him and egging him to put his money where his mouth was. Go on, Bo. You scared? Bo went in by himself, while a couple of us watched through the storefront window. They looked to be having a regular conversation at first, till they got close. Real close. Too close. It's like most seed feed stores. You can get just about anything you want or need. Gets right crowded on collection days, what would be the only store that sells to coloreds, farming tools, grains, oats, and sacks of potatoes. We got a mess of hard candy and colas. Carolyn, my wife, she runs the front. Most days I keep up stock or make supply runs over to Texas for me and one of my brothers. That's where I was the day the boy come inside the store and did all the talking. Bo went in by himself. Then I ran in and I grabbed him from behind. He acted like nothing had happened. He was all glassy-eyed and whatnot. I questioned him about what he said, but his stammer got worse. Then, before we could calm him down, Mrs. Bryant came out of her store and went right to her car. Bo tried to speak, but the only sound he could muster out was a long, high-pitched whistle. It cut through that hot air like a scythe. Then somebody yelled, "She getting a gun!" Like colorless Keystone cops we were, running every which way, bumping into each other. I revved up Uncle's Ford, and they all gave it a push to get it going good. We all squeezed up into that roadster and watched out the back oval window while the Bryant grocery disappeared in a cloud of dirt and gravel. I'm going to stop and read this question from Michelle O'Brien. What factors did you take into account when deciding to mix the timeline? Example, if I heard the story correctly, I heard it moving from Chicago to the knock on the uncle's home in Mississippi and then back to the train. Michelle, that's a really great question, and I love that you asked that question. I found that mixing up the timeline in a way was a way to get audiences of a particular age, especially young people who are used to, what I mean is middle schoolers and high schoolers who are used to timelines in television and film jumping around a little bit. And so I wanted, in a sense, to be able to keep their attention and keep the mystery of the piece intact, And so at times I will jump forward in time just a second or just a hair and jump back in time. But it's all in order to keep the audience's attention, really. I'm also fascinated with timelines and being able to keep the audience's attention by doing that fascinates me. And so that's the reason why I jump from the train, almost as if it's a dream. There's a particular part that I'm not doing tonight where Emmett and his cousins run into a cotton field after a scare, and there is a bit of a dream moment where Uncle Mose stands him up and instructs him on how to pick cotton. Now, of course, it's not happening in that particular moment at night in that cotton field, but the moment itself did happen where Mose Wright says to Emmett, now, you might not be able to pick all this at once. You're just a boy. Now, when you pick this cotton, don't get no blood on the cotton, because nobody wants no bloody cotton. So I'm trying to make analogies there when it comes to bloody cotton and pricking his finger and drawing blood and getting that blood on the cotton to the story itself and to cotton being king. But not only that, whites and blacks and race relations. So there are a number of different things that I'm doing in that moment just by having Uncle Mose tell him not to get blood on the cotton. Michelle has a follow-up. Thank you. It feels also to me like a beautiful opportunity to discuss how messy and non-linear memories and history can be for individuals and points of view. Absolutely. And that is very true. Because if you think about it, those of you all who do not know, Carolyn Bryant was interviewed by Timothy Tyson, and I forget her exact quote, but she never says exactly what happened in that store. She says, what I said happened didn't happen. I just don't remember exactly what happened. And in her opinion, she just has conflated all of those memories in her head. And I believe that happens to a number of people. It happens to all of us. We conflate what we believe to be true with what might not be true, and we start to believe a number of different narratives. Another comment from Donnie. I like how the jumping narrative serves as a correction to J.W. and Roy's story. Absolutely. I decided this was going to be a documentary performance in a sense that sometimes a documentary will undercut itself, or the narrators in a documentary will undercut each other. One narrator or one version of the story or character in a story will say one thing, while another character will say something that contradicts that story. I'll continue. When I returned from our Texas supply run, the story had lit up the town like a grease fire. Colored folks who passed the story on to me. They said the boy from Chicago come talking big that Wednesday evening. Said he was the one visiting preacher. Apparently his big talk didn't end at the storefront. Carolyn confessed she was shaken by it, but had concluded that she and Juanita, J.W.'s wife, won't gonna share the story. But by now it was too far gone, and local whites were talking about me, whispering about me, calling me coward, calling me fool. J.W. come by the store that Saturday night. I told him I was gonna need his hands come Sunday morning. Oh, come on, Roy. Sunday's the only day I can sleep in. How about noon or noon 30? Then I took him round back and told him about the Chicago boy and his advances 3 days before. How he touched Carolyn and spoke dirty while Nita and the children were just a few feet away in the back room. I'll be here. What? I'll be here early. Now, those men said to William Bradford Huey that late that Saturday night, early that Sunday morning, they went by Mose Wright's home. And Wheeler Parker corroborates that story by saying, we was laying in bed Saturday night late early Sunday morning around 2:30, when the first knock came. First one, then two or three, real cold and sterile like the cops on Dragnet. Then I heard what sounded like a white man yelling for Uncle. Only it wasn't Uncle that they wanted. It was Chicago boy. Me, Bobo. Uncle went out to talk to him, and then he ran past our room and back to where Simmy and Bo slept. I'll get him, and I'll bring him out to you. We'll get him ourselves. It was Bo. It was Bo they wanted. The whistling he'd done in money. They had him now, trapped like a rabbit. Bo about give him a fit. I don't put my shoes on without socks. You call me sir, boy, or I'll bust a hole in your skull. We'll pay you what you want. The boy ain't got sense. He ain't know what he was doing. Now, I'm going to pause in the middle of this fairly dramatic action to talk about this moment. And Mo's right. Mo's right had only known for about 24 hours or so what had transpired a few days earlier. He knew at a point where he thought, well, it's a little too late to get him on a train. He knew the taboo, and he knew what could happen to Emmett. But he also knew that it was too late to get him on a train, to get him out of town, and nothing had transpired over the last few days to give him any indication that they were going to come that night. And so therefore, that is why Mo's right did not put him on a train or hide Emmett, even though he had known for a short period of time that Emmett had said something, no one knows, had said something to Carolyn Bryant in that store, and perhaps even whistled. You know me, preacher? Good. How old are you? Well, if you want to live to be 55, you still won't know me tomorrow. I lay there, eyes tight, knowing this wasn't a joke. I knew these people were serious about their boundaries, and those men were dead serious that Sunday morning. Now, the first call that Mamie Till Bradley received was from her aunt. From her aunt down in Mississippi, from Lizzie, informing her that Emmett had been kidnapped, but they weren't sure if he was dead. Later, a day or so later, she received another call. That call again came from Lizzie, and this is what she said. When I made the announcement that Emmett had been found, and how he was found, the whole house began to cry. My eyes were so full of tears I could hardly see. Then I began to make calls. And I called the NAACP. So Mamie, in her biography, she says that she called the NAACP. She called her uncle, who was deep in the unions of Chicago. She called the press. So I just want to pause for a moment to talk about the courage of a woman who could, in the most tragic moment of her life, have the wherewithal to phone the press, to make telephone calls, because she says, I knew that this was a load that I was going to have to carry. I knew I wasn't going to get any help carrying this load. Thousands crowded Chicago's Central Station at 12th Street today to get a glimpse at the tragic homecoming of Emmett Till, the 14-year-old Chicago boy found beaten to death floating in Mississippi's Tallahatchie River. Mamie Till, the mother of the boy, cried out, "Oh, my boy, as 5 men removed the soiled paper-wrapped bundle from an unadorned pinewood box and placed it in a waiting hearse. The crowd was moved to silence when Mrs. Till fell to her knees and prayed aloud for guidance. "O Lord, take my soul, show me what you want me to do, and make me able to do it." The first decision I made was to have a funeral with an open casket. I wanted the world to see what they had done to my boy. The second was to see him myself. So over the course of a couple of days, it is true, thousands passed his coffin there in Chicago. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the news of this spread around the country and then around the world. And then the NAACP, along with the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and a number of other civil rights groups, started raising money. They started raising money not just for the family, but for civil rights. It became a movement. Once people heard this story, and then that fateful picture was placed in Jet magazine, which I am about to show, and I want everyone to know that I'm about to show this. Typically in the longer versions of this particular production, I show the photograph of Emmett and his mutilated face. Rarely do I show it to my student audiences, even though they all can go online and see it themselves. But when I do this particular performance for adult audiences, I do show this image, and I just want you to know that that image is coming up. Mamie describes his body, and in describing his body, she says, "I started at his feet. I felt that's how I was going to make the journey from his feet to his head." She looks at his entire body, but before she gets to his head, she says she thought to herself that it's odd that his body itself was not mutilated. It was bloated, the skin was loose, but no scars, not a sign of violence until I got to his chin. When I got to his chin, I saw his tongue resting there, so it seems to have been choked out of him. On his right cheek was left his eye, hanging there by the optic nerve. I don't know how I kept it together. Mamie goes on to describe the body, and then her sadness and her grief at not being there for him. That my Emmett must have cried out 2 names, God and Mama, and no one answered the call. The trial itself and the transcripts of the trial have only recently been discovered. They've only recently been discovered because they were hidden. They were hidden in an attic. Someone found them, a student found them because a juror had kept a copy of the trial transcripts, and the juror's son was doing a paper on it for college, used the transcripts to write that paper, and then suddenly the transcripts were hidden again. A few years ago, Dr. Tyson was able to find those transcripts again, and those transcripts were used in his book, The Blood of Emmett Till. For myself, I use trial transcripts as well as the journalistic accounts from the Chicago Defender, as well as the Times-Picayune and a number of other papers. Again, trying to get a sense of the
contradictions from each paper. The Chicago Defender would say one thing, while the Times-Picayune would say another thing. I'm going to go to the chat discussion now. The Hate You Give starts with the talk. Yes, The Hate You Give is a great book, and the talk is something that I talk about when I'm doing my post-performance discussions. When I'm doing those post-performance discussions, I tell the audience that I have a couple of boys myself, and when I started doing this play, I didn't have two young brown-skinned boys, and now in recent years the play has become harder to perform because I think about them often as I'm describing that body as Mamie, or when I am in the courtroom and I see this picture of Roy and JW with their own sons watching the trial. I don't want to go over, and I understand that that we might be there at the edge of our time, but I want to open it up to questions, even though, as I stated in the beginning, we might not get to the end of the performance, but I do want to open it up to any questions or comments or oh, great, Andy, thank you so much. Andy says we can go to 8:45. So I'm going to do a little bit of the trial. Y'all give a listen. My name is Sheriff Strata of Money. Upon direction from Judge Curtis L. Swango, I've been instructed that there are seats in the back for colored, 4 to be exact. We don't mix down here, and we don't intend to start now. All rise. All rise for Judge Curtis L. Swango. Mose took the trial stand and gave his account of that night. Now understand that when Mose spoke, he also mentioned the fact that it wasn't just Roy and JW at the door, that it was several men, including a couple of African American men, to which the defense attorney said, Mose, didn't you tell defense attorneys that the only reason you thought that it was Roy and JW at the door was because one of the men was big and bald? You said there was never any light shined in that house. How you know it was Roy and JW if you never saw anybody's face? You said one of the men was colored. How you know that if you couldn't see anyone's face, Mose? Because colored folk know to stay on the porch. No further questions. See, the idea was to poke holes in the prosecution's assertion that the body pulled out of the river was even Till's, leveraging a good bit of reasonable doubt. That was the idea. Chicago Defender, Mrs. Bradley, do you subscribe to those newspapers? I see. Well, do you read it? You're right. The plain truth is hard to come by. Tell me something, Mrs. Bradley. How much insurance did you have on your son's life? Ooh, $400. You collected on them policies? Well, I'm sorry, Your Honor, but it has not been proven that the body pulled out of the river was even Till's. How we know for sure? How we know that boy ain't walking around Chicago or Detroit right now with this woman's daddy? So even though it was an all-white jury, they knew that they still had to present somewhat of a case. So the case that they presented was the case of an African-American youth that looked like a man that made a pass, a physical pass at Carolyn Bryant. I was in the front of the store, and Mrs. J.W. Milam was in the living quarters with the children. Around 8 o'clock, a Negro man came into the store and walked up to the candy case. Now, I'm going to pause here in Carolyn Bryant's testimony, because here's an instance where, when I originally did my research, every newspaper account
had her saying a Negro man walked up into the store and walked up to the candy case. The Picayune said that. The Chicago Defender said that. Well, the trial transcript actually says, I was in the store, and around 8 o'clock, a nigger man walked into the store and walked up to the candy case. I asked him what he wanted, and I gave him the merchandise. No, he did not. He grabbed my hand with a strong grip, and he said, how about a date, baby? I then turned to start to the back. He put his hands on my waist, and he said, what's the matter, baby? Can't take it? I've been with white girls before. You need not be afraid of me. Then he used language that I don't use. Unprintable, yes. Then another nigger man walked into the store, grabbed him by the arm, and dragged him out. So the trial transcripts say that she said that. And also the trial transcripts tell us that, in fact, the jury was not in the room when she gave her testimony. The newspaper accounts make it seem like she was, make it seem like that the jury was in the room when she gave her testimony. They were not. She did not give her testimony to the jury. And she did not say Negro. In fact, she said nigger man. Again, the whole trial only took the course of a couple of days. Has the jury reached its verdict? Please stand and read it aloud. So, they were acquitted. And typically, when I do this particular moment in the show, and this is the only moment where I have actual audience interaction, I have in my back pocket a slip of paper that says not guilty on it. I hand that piece of paper to an audience member, and they stand and they read that not guilty verdict aloud. I think in that moment, we bridge history and theatricality with empathy and humanity. It puts the onus not just on that individual who has to read this verdict aloud, but an entire audience that may, up until that point, had been keeping the story itself at arm's length. Now, seeing one of their own, that is, an audience member, taking part in the story, now they realize that this entire time, they have not been passengers on this ride. They have been driving it every much as I have. Now 8:37, and I want to open it up to any questions that you all might have. This is certainly not the end of the performance, but I want to give enough time to folks that have comments or questions about the performance. I end the performance, of course. I couldn't not end the performance without having Mamie Till Bradley speak to her experiences. I want to read a quote before I open it up to questions, and that quote is from The Blood of Emmett Till. Exactly what happened between Carolyn Bryant and Emmett Till at that store will never be revealed to a certainty, probably not even to her. What she did or didn't do with respect to his kidnapping may never be entirely clear. But how Mamie Bradley dug deep within herself and inspired thousands of other Americans to move is clear enough. From this tragedy, large, diverse numbers of people organized a movement that grew to transform a nation, not sufficiently but certainly meaningfully. What matters most is what we have done and will do with what we know. We must look at the facts squarely, not to flounder in a bitter nostalgia of pain, but to redeem a democratic promise rooted in the living ingredients of our own history. The bloody and unjust arc of our history will not bend upward if we merely pretend that history did not happen here. We cannot transcend our past without confronting it. As Du Bois wrote in 1912, this country has had its appetite for facts on the Negro question spoiled by sweets. I see that quote from Du Bois, and I learn from it. I learned that in my productions, I can't shy away from the facts. I can't shy away from telling the hard stories. We can't shy away from telling these hard stories. But in performing them, in dramatizing them, we can make these stories accessible. We can make these stories accessible to middle schoolers. We can make this particular story accessible to middle schoolers, high schoolers, and so on. So with that said, I want to open it up to anyone that has a question or a comment. Susan says, I have taught this story many times, but not until tonight did it become this real. You brought it to life. Amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I think I saw a comment earlier that I wanted to go back to. Hey, Mike, from Mike Williams. Hey, Mike, another solid performance. Wife and I saw The Fire of Freedom in Chapel Hill a few months back, followed by dinner at 411 West. Hey, Mike, hey, with Till, the significance of the white girl in the wallet resonates. How important was this fact to the production? That's a great question. And I have the opportunity to meet her, by the way, a few years ago when I performed this production in Chicago. She came up to me after performance, and at first I thought, really, is this really the woman? And then a few months ago, she was interviewed in a Mississippi newspaper, and I realized that it was in fact her. Now, going to your question, what was the significance of him having that picture in his wallet to the production? It said to me that that Emmett either did not fear those taboos in Mississippi, or he did not fear them enough. It also was helpful to create his character, to create the kind of kid that would be, to a degree, fearless. It also helped me look back at my 14-year-old self and bridge the 14-year-old Emmett with my own 14-year-old self, knowing some of the things I might have said or I might have done that were considered out of pocket in a sense. Mike says, I think Emmett didn't understand the taboos in Money, Mississippi. I think you're right that there were certainly parts of those taboos that he didn't understand. Certainly so. I think also that it has been written in the last several years that he understood them to a degree, but not quite to the tragic degree that his life ended. Michelle O'Brien, is there a set of primary sources out there that hold interview, court transcripts, video, etc., that we could have for students to explore? I have a study guide that I use that's on my website, but there are also other sources that are out there that are not on my website. I think Stanley Nelson's documentary is a really great documentary. I think again the Blood of Emmett Till is a really great book that helps encapsulate the story. I also think that Emmett Till, the book, there's a book called Emmett Till, and that book is written by Devery S. Anderson, and that particular book is a really great source for the history and the background and the movement that took place after Emmett's death. I'm sorry. Can you please answer my question about the Sons? Kelly, let me just scroll back here and find it. Okay. Did the sons of J.W. and Roy ever talk about their fathers? Okay. So no, they never talk about their fathers. Not in interviews. Not that I've seen anywhere. And not only that, a few years ago, I would say over 10 years ago, 60 Minutes went down to attempt to interview Carolyn Bryant, and one of those sons came out, and it was I'm sorry, I forget his name, the reporter that's since passed away for 60 Minutes, Ed Bradley. Ed Bradley was standing out there, and the son walked out and threatened him, told him if he didn't get off of their property that he would harm him physically. So that's the only time I think I've seen or heard one of those sons speaking. Any other questions?
So
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to go over. I really appreciate that.
I want to thank Mike for spending the last hour and a half with us and giving us such a stirring and moving performance. I want to thank each of you for sticking with us. I understand that the technical difficulties were a little bit frustrating, but I think it was worth it. Mike's an absolute pro, and he was able to get into character and give his interpretation of the Emmett Till story. I think one of the things I'd like to emphasize, though, is the historical work that he put into creating that character and those characters and their interactions. There was source work, there was inquiry, there was research, but there was also some common sense interpretations. Things like, what likely would a set of 14-year-old buddies outside of a grocery store in a faraway place say to each other? And I think one of the things that I would encourage all of us to consider doing in terms of handling these very difficult and complex topics in the past is striving for that sense of empathy, that sense of connection, that sense of humanity. 14-year-old boys in that time period are not noticeably different than those today. Of course, the context is different, and of course, life is different, but the basic human motivations and interactions are oftentimes very similar. I would encourage each of you also to go to Mike Wiley Productions, Mike's website, and you can see both in video form and media form other plays that he performs, and also get a sense of what he does with schools and with districts and with states. And if you're so capable or you'd like to contact Mike, I absolutely guarantee you that he would be willing to interact with you by email or find some time to work with you and your students. Tonight's session has been recorded. I understand that there's a certain amount of sort of white noise at the beginning. We'll edit that out, but you will be able to grab the webinar itself and the slideshow that corresponds with Mike's performance. So you can listen to it again. Maybe you can share parts of it with your classes. You can find ways to bring those voices, which again is not just a voice telling the past, documenting the past. It's a little bit of a time travel and trying to really get a sense of the context and the interactions, the humanity of the time. Again, Brennan, Mike's website address is MikeWileyProductions.com. And if you search Mike Wiley, Emmett Till on Google, I guarantee you'll find a whole variety of, thanks, Michelle, a whole variety of resources. So thanks again, everyone. I know we stayed a little bit later than we usually do. Please keep in touch with us through our social media. Our Facebook, our Twitter, and our YouTube channels are great ways to see the other activities that we have at the center. Don't forget that tonight you will receive a survey. I'm sure it's part of that survey is the technology, please be honest. But you'll also have a chance to evaluate the content and the work that Mike did. So take a moment to do that and then download the certificate that is coming your way. Our next webinar, next Thursday, January 17th, will be a session on hip hop scholarship. We'll be working with A.D. Carson, who's an assistant professor at the University of Virginia. As a matter of fact, his title at UVA is Professor of Hip Hop. So AD is going to spend some time with us, sort of bringing forth the way that Hip Hip Hooray says, Susie, really trying to explore hip hop culture and give us some sense of the way that overlaps with the last 30 years. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time at the National Humanities Center webinar, Humanities in Class webinar series. Good night, everyone. Have a great day tomorrow.